You're watching TVC Breakfast. The proposed launch of Nigeria's national carrier, Nigeria Air, was suspended months after the name Nigeria Air and logo was unveiled at the air show in the United Kingdom in July 2018.
Since then, not much has been heard on the issue except the allocation of over 4 billion naira as working capital on the national carrier project in the 2020 budget. As we cruise through the year, Nigerians are asking if a national carrier will be launched this year. Well, joining us now is Managing Partner at Glo Aviation, Tayo Ujiri. Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Nice to see you.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Good.
Now, experts are optimistic for 2020, especially for the aviation sector, that it would be a defining year, and they are hopeful that the idea for having a national carrier will be birthed and to help, deepen the markets for Nigeria in the international scene. Are you that optimistic?
Unfortunately, I'm not. I'm not one of those experts that are optimistic, though I'm an internal optimist in Nigeria. Why so? I believe we're laying the horse before the cart, in the sense that we're supposed to have infrastructure that will drive that national carrier. Let's just run this scenario of when we start that national carrier with the setup that was mentioned at Farnborough, with the domestic operations, with the international operations. What airports would they operate from? Looking at what the airports that we have and infrastructure we have now, what is the infrastructure, the facilitation process, and the challenges that we have now, it's going to be a huge nightmare. The other portion is the funding. They've not been able to actually get the funding. You mentioned 4 billion from government.
Yes.
But over and beyond that, aviation, like we all know, it's a huge capital-intensive sector. For you to operate an airline, you have to have that funding to buy the aircraft or to lease the aircraft. Have they been able to gather those funding? The model was that we have 95% of private funding and 5% of government funding. With that 95%, due to perception issues, due to trends that we've seen, and what we call the Nigerian factor, the challenge of doing business in Nigeria, we've not been able to attract the type of technical partners or the kind of perception and that confidence for people to come and put their money in this project for the project to fly.
All right. Now, we have a Minister of Aviation that is said to have experience when it comes to understanding how the industry works. If this has to kick off now, what are the foundational issues that has to be considered or that need to be considered before the takeoff of a carrier from where we stand right now?
Obviously, I think what needs to be done first, we've had the same minister for the second term now.
Yes.
And what needs to be done is just the infrastructure. Okay. Let's have, first of all, an airport system that works. Once you have an airport system that works, it's
the airports we have now are not adequate. Is that it?
It's not that they're not. We have 22 airports owned and operated by funds. We have state airports, but it's not a matter of just building airports. Okay. It's an airport that works with the infrastructure. When you're actually planning an airline as well, you have to know what the demography and the routes, demography of your passengers, and the routes that those passengers will fly.
Let's start from the airport that works. Certainly, for a traveler like me, for instance, or like us, for instance, if we go to Dubai Airport or Otambo Airport in Johannesburg and we come back to Abuja or Lagos, we see the sharp difference. But what is that airport that works? What does it mean?
It's not about the size. Okay. It's about the functionality and the process. Okay. Over and beyond that, when we look at the way of doing business now, we are trying to put technology into the processes. We found that technology eases convenience, provides the convenience. Let's start from the when you arrive or you're departing from the airports. That traffic on the ramp, they're trying to manage
and the navigation system.
Exactly.
But the government has, over time, even in 2019, tried to improve on facilities across the airports.
Unfortunately, the growth vis-a-vis that capacity is constrained. So yes, they are, but obviously it's a function of, am I getting value for the money I'm paying at the airport? In the last 2 days, unfortunately, we know Hamilton comes.
Yes.
We've had lots of foreign airlines diverting to Ghana, diverting to Benin Republic. The question I always ask is, if it's the same weather pattern, or when you look at the weather pattern and what you call your weather report, you find out there isn't much difference. So how are they able to land in
those
at
airports?
I appreciate what they've done so far.
All right.
And back to what you said, yes, legislation, they've been able to actually change the legislation, is going through the Senate for the airports to be broken down. Once it's broken down, it's if the management, the FAN MD actually said recently that we have 22 airports or 28 airports, and only 2 are bringing money.
All right.
Okay.
Tayo
The
Ujiri.
others are taking money.
We have to leave it at this point. Thank you for your time on TVC Breakfast.
It's always a pleasure.
Right. Joining us now is the managing partner at Glow Aviation, Tayo Ujiri. It's nice to have you join us right now.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Now, if we see that the government has allocated some amount of money in the 2020 budget, 4 billion naira as it is, what kind of hope should Nigerians have? Does that mean that, okay, there's going to, from your perspective as the aviation person who has been watching what government is doing and all of that, should that send signals that the government is serious about a national carrier this year?
There's one thing putting the money down, and there's another thing attracting those that would invest in it.
Okay.
So we've had transaction advisors, a chunk of that money goes to them for the processes and procedure, but obviously is attracting the right people to invest in the national carrier. Again, the challenges are perception problem, the model, and you actually find out that you already have a situation where the policies are not, and the environment is not attractive for investors. So you see the cost of operations and operating within Nigeria, even within Africa itself, has its challenging factors with high cost of infrastructure, insurance, the fueling, which is 40% of the airline's operations. We have the we have the capacity, human capacity here. Lots of aviation professionals within Nigeria and within Africa. But obviously, over and beyond that, you have the maintenance factor. There's no credible maintenance repair organization within Nigeria. So all this cost would affect the operations and visibility of an airline. But it's not to write it off. It's obviously to see how do they intend to actually implement the steps. It's been 3 years or 4 years, like you said. It's just to tell us what are the milestones that have been actually achieved so far. What is the next step? And with that done, we're able to see, okay, we've actually have bidders. At some point, we had lots of people that said we had some major airlines that were able to, that were interested in technical partnership. Over and beyond time, they actually fizzled out. So with that, who are those interested in that now? You know, as this time passes, you have other African airlines that have actually started. You have Air Senegal that started. You have Air Cote d'Ivoire that started. You have AirSky that's actually taking regional preeminence. And once it actually have all those airlines evolve, airline business is a function of perception and awareness. When you're used to an airline, and all these airlines that have grown and built up their clientele over time, you find that it'll be so challenging for Air Nigeria to come in and actually grow within 3 to 5 years. Not talking about the management and the government interference that might affect it.
But one would expect that being a giant of Africa, Nigeria should be part of major players in the aviation market globally, because you see that there is a huge passenger growth when it comes to Africa and globally, you know, struggling and crumbling for this market. And Nigeria has to get a share of the market because we're looking at other sources of funds aside petrol, so to speak.
Yes, like you rightly said, and there's evidence to buttress that. The population is there, we're at 180 million. They're saying statistics show that out of that 180 or 200 million, 10% should fly, which should be 20 million. We're not there yet. We're about 5 million per annum. It depends. Domestic is about 8 million. So when we're looking at international, about 5 to 7, when we're looking at that number still dwindling, and due to macro and microeconomic factors, it's not pushing it. Aviation should be actually contributing about 7-10% to our GDP. At the moment, it's 0.04.
Wow.
When it started, now there's 0.06%. So these are challenges within the system. Over and beyond that, what's going to happen, or what we're going to see happen with the signing of the single Air African trade market, you find that all these airlines that have evolved will take advantage of the market because we don't have a strong domestic carrier that's going to reciprocate the BASA routes. So it's better we start and we know what we're doing, and we actually kickstart that process and start in good time, even evolve with domestic airline, and actually have airlines that would operate, or the national carrier that will operate our secondary airports, because we understand and we see that the roads are still not an option. The waterways are not a challenge.
The rail is not available.
Exactly.
Now, some Nigerians said they were calling for translating one of the local carriers into a national carrier. Even had the names of airlines like Arik were mentioned, and some people said no. There's still that issue, there, and it has to be cleared before taking it to another level to say, okay, fine, he's going to be a national carrier. What do you say to that?
Well, obviously, what needed to be done, the minister, actually, the honorable minister, when the Arik and Aero debate came out, he said no.
Okay.
He had his reasons. It's obviously to find out how can they actually eliminate the debt burden that AMCON is taking it over. And what AMCON is looking for is a reliable, viable person to buy it over. Is the government able to do that? I believe they can, but they have to get technical partners as well as the funding. The funding is not a short-term funding. It's a long-term funding. And it's funding you have to look outside of Nigeria for. And it's a function of confidence in the system. The growth is there eventually, but is that confidence for people to actually get that money? Well, don't forget at this time we have challenges of security, healthcare, roads that Nigeria has to put that funding to.
Anyway, time will not permit us now. I've talked about the issue of taxes in that area, but maybe some other time. Thank you very much,
My pleasure.
for coming.
Thank you.
Well, joining us now is managing partner at Glow Aviation, Tayo Ojuri. Good morning.
Good
Thank
morning.
you for joining us
Glad
on
to have you join
TVC
us.
Breakfast.
Same here.
Yeah.
Now, looking at the array of challenges, talking about funding and infrastructure, should we just shelve the idea of having a national carrier, or do we go the way of having a national flag bearer, as some have suggested?
That's a very good question. We should not actually shelve it because government is highly interested in it. But the option is actually, first of all, establish what needs to be done, as in what would happen to the routes and what's the way forward in this instance. Talking with the stakeholders, because you have lots of few domestic carriers which are actually flying, or they've actually been given the major lucrative routes and all these other happen. So what's going to happen with the government's perceived carrier when they start? What's going to happen to the operators at the moment? Most times we've seen over time that the actually government carrier gets preferential treatment. So it's to actually carry stakeholders along in the process. And then with that, with the stakeholders now, educate the public on what the steps that have been taken so far. Most importantly is the fact that it has to be a transparent system. A transparent system, the legal framework to actually give the investing public the assurance for them to come in. Once that's put in place, I believe to a great extent that would have foreign investors that will be interested to come and actually invest in the national carrier. Because obviously the population is there, the geographical location is there, and there's the data to portray the fact that between now and 2030, there's going to be the exponential growth in Africa.
That's great potential. And Nigeria is seen as one of the most lucrative markets in aviation within the African continent, if not one of the most lucrative.
Yes, it is.
Now, if we have all of that to attract the best hands, investors and all of that, and we're not doing it rightly, what are countries like Ethiopia and Kenya, even Rwanda, what are they doing differently? And they have their carriers or flag carriers or national carriers flying so well?
You've gone actually so far. We're not reinventing the wheel.
Okay.
What we've actually over time, over years, we've talked about Nigeria being the hub. We see all these potentials, but potentials not activated is a dormant potential.
Is it all about government? Government not doing what it's supposed to do?
Obviously, it's providing an enduring environment, but I like actually putting examples where the rubber meets the road. Okay. In the instance of, we've seen that we've not actually, while we were sleeping, Ghana went ahead and had our breakfast, or had our food for lunch. We actually have the enduring environment whereby they have a good airport system, major airport. The gateway has been developed and upgraded. Talking about technology, they have embraced technology. They have a cargo system where there has been actually put with a public-private partnership. And you actually have a backward integration where agriculture is being integrated into the system to actually activate the airport system, as well as tourism. Because aviation as itself is a driver to so many other things. So we see lots of tourism. For example, this year, Ghana has actually embraced on Return to Africa initiative, where you have lots of African Americans and Africans in diaspora come back to Ghana. So you have this growth that's actually growing and making aviation a huge contribution to the economy.
Creating a good perception for
so
Ghana.
we've seen that, and obviously they want to leverage on that to actually create a national carrier, and they have actually gone to Ethiopia, like you rightly mentioned. They've done a good job of growing their airline and actually birthing a smaller airline, A-Sky. With that birth, they've actually seen regional growth because we have problems with regional integration.
Yes.
And with that, they're able to move further.
All right. As much as you have established that it is important we have a national carrier, one of the major concerns is the sustenance of the competition in the global market if we are to have a national carrier. What can we do in that aspect, seeing that we are pushing, we are interested in this idea?
Let me stand to correct you, though. I am not of the point of view that we should have a national carrier. We could have a flag carrier.
All right, a flag carrier.
A flag carrier which originates from Nigeria and carrying Nigerian flag, which we already have done. But obviously, aviation is very competitive. The airline, the passenger goes with the most convenient airline. So what's key is to provide a service that is able to meet the demography of the Nigerian public, to routes that are served and routes that are underserved. So you actually have these opportunities that the flag carrier or a national carrier, if it eventually comes on board, will be able to optimize.
Interesting.
All right. Tayo Ojiri, thank you so much for coming on the program.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.